Alright everyone, welcome to the channel. So in today's video, we're going to be switching things up a bit. We're actually going to be quantifying Bitcoin against different asset classes. Now, if you're like myself, then you come to the Bitcoin markets to get away from, the standard of measuring things against fiat. We believe, at least myself as a Bitcoiner, I believe that in the future things may be priced against Bitcoin. So it's interesting to look at Bitcoin through a different scope, a different perspective, and quantify it in a different way than simply having the Bitcoin price divided by the US dollar. And I'm sure you've all seen this chart 1,000,001 times. This is simply the price of Bitcoin divided by the US dollar. But how else can we quantify Bitcoin? How else can we look at Bitcoin through different perspectives? And that is what we're going to dive into in today's video. So we're actually going to start off by quantifying Bitcoin by dividing it by the M2 money supply. Now, you might be wondering, why would we be dividing Bitcoin by the M2 money supply? Well, it's very easy. I'm sure all of you have seen, all of you have heard, in the past couple of years or so, the Fed has been increasing the quote-unquote quantitative easing. That's what they're calling it. And because of this, you can see the price of Bitcoin and a lot of other crypto assets have been going exponentially up because they're measured against the dollar, and the dollar is becoming hyperinflated. So it's hard to see, when you've got, all-time highs here, and you can see that we haven't returned to the all-time high. This is against Bitcoin divided by the US dollar. But what's interesting is if we go and check out Bitcoin divided by the M2 money supply, so this accounts for inflation, you can actually see Bitcoin is not as euphoric as we previously thought it would be. So when we're accounting for inflation, when we're quantifying Bitcoin, you can actually see that Bitcoin has already broken below its previous all-time high that it did in December of 2017. And this is very interesting to see because we come over to the regular BTC USD chart, and we can clearly see, if we get a horizontal line, that we are not near the previous all-time high. In fact, we're actually, leaps and bounds away from it. We are up 46% from Bitcoin's previous all-time high. But when you account for the money supply, you can actually see that we're 5% down against the previous all-time high. So this is very interesting to note, that when you do quantify Bitcoin against the M2 money supply, it's not as bullish as we previously would have thought when we do account for inflation. This does not mean that Bitcoin's not bullish. I mean, we can clearly look at this chart, and even accounting for inflation, Bitcoin is arguably the best long-term performing asset. I don't even think it's arguable. I don't think anything has outperformed Bitcoin in the past, 11 years the way that Bitcoin has. So very interesting to quantify Bitcoin against the M2 money supply and see, when you actually do account for money, for the inflation, that we didn't even really make a new all-time high. I mean, we did make a new all-time high by a very, very tiny amount. So it's very interesting to note that when you do actually account for inflation, Bitcoin's new all-time high from, the 2021 top over till November 2021 was only an increase of 1.8% when you do count for the money supply. But, we extrapolate, and not including for the increase in the money supply, you can see we went up 6% instead of 2%. So when we do incorporate the M2 money supply, you can see that Bitcoin doesn't always move up as fast as we previously thought it did. However, it is still exceptionally bullish. Now, let's quantify Bitcoin using something else. Let's quantify Bitcoin using the Nasdaq. So this is simply a chart of Bitcoin divided by the Nasdaq. And as you can see, Bitcoin against the Nasdaq is very, very nice. The Nasdaq is coming into a valuation around the levels of 12,387, and Bitcoin is sitting around the 2.38 on this index. So this is also very interesting to note. You can see, accounting for the Nasdaq, we've actually capitulated quite hard below the previous all-time high. Let's see how we've done in previous times when we have all-time highs. You can actually see it doesn't look like we capitulated below the 2013 all-time high ever. the 2017 all-time high, you can see we are now currently capitulating below, and I don't even need to draw a line on this chart to see that Bitcoin never came back to its BTC Nasdaq valuation back in 2011. So this is also very interesting to see. The Nasdaq is a lot more bullish than the US dollar over time, so when you do compare BTC to the Nasdaq, it's a little bit more flat and a little bit less exponential. And if we do extrapolate how much extra, if you were holding Bitcoin, how much you outperform the Nasdaq coming into the next market cycle, you can see we outperform the Nasdaq by 60% from market cycle to market cycle. So this is also a very interesting perspective that I do think is very interesting. Let's scroll down and compare it against something else. You can see BTC divided by Tesla. Now, this is one of the most interesting charts. And what you'll notice about it is there really wasn't much of a difference between what happened in 2017 and 2019, and especially what happened in 2021 to 2022. It seems that Tesla was exceptionally bullish, and BTC never made it back up to these previous tops of 2017. And if we go over to Tesla and we click on it and we zoom out, we can see why, because Tesla from 2019 went from $36 all the way up to $1,250. So it makes sense that Bitcoin was not as exponential against Tesla. But what you do notice against the BTC Tesla pair is it's a lot more euphoric. Tesla does a lot of moving as well, so you can see we're really up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, and it's very brutal and very choppy when we quantify things against Tesla. And we zoom out on Tesla. Tesla seems like it's a lot more smooth sailing than BTC, so a very interesting pair to compare the two with. But you can still see September 20, we are above the high, we are above the lows from 2 years ago. So at least historically on this, we've always made higher lows. Even from this low here to this low here, we did peak above it just very slightly. So Bitcoin against Tesla does seem to be a very good performer. However, since 2017, Tesla has put Bitcoin a little bit to shame, and that is why we're seeing Bitcoin go from 288 Tesla stock all the way down to 38.27. That is very interesting to note. And yeah, I might consider looking more into Tesla and other stocks that do outperform Bitcoin from time to time. Let's check out Bitcoin divided by the SPY, which is basically Bitcoin divided by the stock market, or at least the ETF. The SPY is the ETF derivative of the SPX. You can see the SPY is basically just an index representing more or less 10% of the SPX. So looking at Bitcoin divided by the SPY, what you'll notice about this chart is it's almost indistinguishable from looking at Bitcoin versus the US dollar. If we pull up this Bitcoin pair, let me go back so I can cycle between the charts, you really won't notice too much difference between the BTC USD chart and the BTC SPY chart. In fact, if you put this underneath my nose and told me this was BTC USD, I would completely agree with you. I mean, let's just zoom in and take a gander at the data, but you can see, this bottom looks exactly like when Bitcoin was in this breakdown of this triangle pattern. We capitulated, this was the March 20 pandemic scare, and you can see the double peak just the same as before. The only thing to note about this double peak is that this peak was actually slightly lower than the initial peak we had. And what does that mean? That simply means that during this time, the SPY probably outperformed Bitcoin, at least from the stages of April to November, because as you can see, when Bitcoin comes back for its second peak, we only get 147 units of the SPY, whereas previously you would have had 157. So that is also something very interesting to know. And also, like some of the other stock charts, for example, the M2 money supply, which is not a stock chart, my bad, but comparing it with the M2 money supply is very similar to what we're seeing here, where we've already capitulated below the lows of the all-time high. But you look at it against BTC versus the USD, and you can clearly see, you know, we haven't come down to this capitulation level yet. So BTC versus the SPY is another very interesting one. Tesla so far, Tesla is the most unique chart that we've taken a look at so far. Now this is where it gets interesting. Let's quantify Bitcoin against some of the most popular precious metals and commodities. So if we look at Bitcoin versus gold, what you'll also notice with Bitcoin versus gold is it's basically indistinguishable from Bitcoin versus the US dollar, and there's a very, very good reason for that, and that is because if you look at gold versus the US dollar, gold has not really moved in terms of price momentum, hasn't moved in terms of percentages for, you know, more than 10 years or so. Gold has been the same price for absolutely forever. And if we come over to gold so I can show you this, you know, we can zoom out, you can see 2011 all the way to where we are in 2022, you know, we're still in the exact same trading zone. So I mean, if I get this and just kind of use this as an accumulation range, you can kind of see these levels that we were at back in 2011 were the exact same price. So gold doesn't really move too much, and gold isn't actually outperforming the US dollars by too many standards. I mean, I imagine if you had your money in the bank for this 11-year period, you would have ended up with more dollars in profit than just holding gold for 11 years. So gold seems to be very unprofitable, not only against the US dollar, but especially against Bitcoin. You can see, and I did some conversions before I did this just to make sure that everything was correct on this. And as you can see, if we convert to gold, here it says we can get 16.29 ounces of gold. So if we type in 16.29, slap that into the calculator, you can see the US dollar valuation of this would be roughly about $29,500. And then, very interestingly, come over to Bitcoin. What is the price of Bitcoin? $29,495. So I did just do the maths on the gold and the silver pair before this. I did do it on all of them, to be fair, just to make sure that these are all accurate, because some of these indexes, for example, I typed in the index for Facebook, and we'll get into that in a moment, was incorrect, and I had to make some amendments to that. So, like I said, we're looking at Bitcoin divided by gold, and what you'll notice is that we are very, very much extremely bullish. I mean, if we look at back to where, you know, this is obviously not Bitcoin's inception, that was, you know, between 2008 and 2009, but since this was trading on the BTC index chart, you can actually notice that back here Bitcoin was worth 0 gold whatsoever, and we actually peaked out in 2011 coming in at 0.02 ounces of gold. So, you know, not even like a gram of gold or anything. And then you come up to 2013, and you'll note that we topped out at basically 1 ounce of, or 1 troy ounce of gold. This is measured in troy ounces rather than regular ounces. That is how bars of gold and bars of silver are measured anyway, in case you did not know. So like I said, you know, 1 ounce of gold in 2013 equals 1 Bitcoin. In 2017, 15.63 ounces of gold equals 1 Bitcoin. Don't show this chart to Peter Schiff, he's not going to like it, but, you know, coming over to 2021, the initial peak was coming in at 36.8 gold, and this is interesting with this double peak. You can actually see we went all the way up to 37.87 ounces of gold. Why is this interesting? Well, some of the valuations of BTC divided by other assets and other commodities did not reach a new all-time high. In fact, some of them stayed the same, or some of them did not even make the same peak. For example, I believe looking at Tesla, you know, this was the peak. You know, Tesla was outperforming, and, you know, this second peak was actually a lower low. So it's interesting to see that Bitcoin actually made another higher high. This is indicative that Bitcoin was outperforming gold. As it always does, you know, you can just zoom out on this chart and you can very much see that 1 ounce of gold does not equals 1 Bitcoin all the time. Gold is majorly capitulating against Bitcoin, and even though Bitcoin is still coming down and Peter Schiff is saying, you know, Bitcoin has failed, blah, 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 Bitcoin is still well, I believe it's worth a lot more, but it is priced at 16.23 troy ounces of gold. So very interesting comparing Bitcoin against gold. Now, it makes sense to move on to silver before we do the next one. So let's check out BTC against silver. And this one surprised me. I don't collect silver, so I didn't know how much silver weighed. And this was why I actually initially had to fact check this, because apparently if we type in 1,400 troy ounces of silver, is just under $29,400. So you can basically get more than 1,400 troy ounces of silver for one Bitcoin, and this is very interesting as well. And what you'll notice on this chart as well is that the chart looks exactly identical to BTC divided by the US dollar, and the reason for this is because the same way that this chart looked the same as BTC divided by gold, I mean, if I show you these two, you can really see there is really no difference between the two of them, apart from the fact that Bitcoin capitulated slightly harder against gold than it did on silver. And why is this? Why does the chart for Bitcoin and silver, why does the chart for silver and gold and the US dollar against Bitcoin all look the same? Well, there's a very simple reason for that. It's because the US dollar, gold and silver have not exponentially increased in value. So when you're comparing Bitcoin against these other assets, you're comparing something that's in an 11-year parabolic rally, or should I say 12 years, not incorporating the data from the first transaction, but we're incorporating 12 years worth of a parabolic run for Bitcoin, and we're comparing that against assets which, you know, go up % a year, if that. So the interesting thing is when you measure things like the stock market, gold, silver, and the US dollar against Bitcoin, they all look the same. And like I said, it's because, you know, these assets do not move around too much. And what's interesting is you can see 2011 top, one Bitcoin was coming in at just under 1 troy ounce of silver. Coming into the 2013 peak, you can see 65 ounces. 2017, 1,200 ounces, which is slightly interesting, because you'll notice that we did not actually rally. Oh no, so this is a logarithmic growth scale, but we actually rallied pretty hard against silver in the past bull run. I mean, we've gone up 129%, and obviously Bitcoin went up, you know, more than that from the previous all-time high. If we come from the BTC USD pair, you can actually see from the peak 260%. So what does this tell us? This tells us that even though silver is more bullish than the US dollar within the time period from 2017 up to 2021, 2022, it still looks exactly the same as Bitcoin against the US dollar, Bitcoin against gold, and obviously Bitcoin against silver. They all look the same, and this is because Bitcoin is exponentially increasing, especially when you put it on a logarithmic growth curve scale. You can just see, I mean, these peaks, they stay the same no matter what you're checking it against. Checking BTC USD against US oil. Now, we are going to ignore this anomaly. We're just going to pretend that this data point doesn't exist. And if we do look out, the important thing about this is that BTC against oil is also something that's exceptionally bullish. But you also notice these bear market phases that we have against the oil pair are not as brutal as against the US dollar pair. I mean, we really did not capitulate an insane amount compared to what it looked like we did on the USD pair. You can also see that from the peak in 2021 over to the next peak in 2021, we didn't actually make a higher high. So this is indicative that oil was also moving up, and oil has been outperforming Bitcoin since the peak in 2021. That is also something that is very interesting. Now, from peak to peak, Bitcoin outperformed oil by 218% from cycle top to cycle top. So once again, very, very impressive on the Bitcoin scale of things. If we come over to BTC versus Facebook, and this is the thing I had to fact check, because previously when I had this one up, it had the weirdest chart I've ever seen, and this definitely was not BTC versus Facebook. But now we've come to the chart. By the way, if you do want me to show you how to quantify these charts against Facebook, then let me know down in the comments below, and I'll definitely make a tutorial on how to do this tomorrow. The thing about this is it's not as simple as just clicking on add symbol and typing in BTC Facebook. I wish it was, for example, BTC NDQ for the NASDAQ. You can't find it, so you have to type in something very specific, and yeah, I guess that would be something that you'd let me know if you do want me to make a video on that, so you can see if you did want to quantify other assets like, for example, Apple, Coinbase, Netflix, and different currency pairs that I haven't looked at. If that is something you want me to do, then let me know, and I'll make an update as soon as tomorrow for you. So, quantifying Bitcoin against Facebook. So for this, we're having the Bitcoin chart divided by Facebook's stock price. And what do we notice? Well, they're both moving pretty strongly, as I can tell from this. It doesn't seem like Bitcoin is as exponentially bullish against Facebook as other assets. And this would probably have to mean that if we do type in Facebook stock, Facebook must have also been on a very, very nice rally during this time. If we zoom out on the weekly, you can see Facebook has pretty much, just like Bitcoin, been in a parabolic rally from its inception, down here at $17 all the way up to $385. Facebook looks, I don't want to say undervalued, but it's very, very oversold at this moment in time. So Facebook has also been completely capitulated against. Let's go over to the BTC Facebook pair then. So this is why we're seeing Bitcoin against Facebook is performing very, very nicely recently. You can see, I mean, if we extrapolate a trend line, we're still very, very bullish for Bitcoin against Facebook, and this is because Facebook has been performing quite poorly coming into the past year. For example, if we look at Bitcoin versus the US dollar, you can actually see if we do have a trend line, that it would have been flat here and we've capitulated below it, but you look at Bitcoin against Facebook and we're not capitulating at all, we're just making higher lows. So let's check out how Bitcoin has performed against Facebook over the time. Well, in the first peak of December 2013, you can see Bitcoin was equivalent to approximately 26 units of Facebook stock. If we come over to the peak in December of 2017, you'll notice that Bitcoin was equivalent to 104 units of Facebook stock. And from peak to peak, as we've been doing in the previous videos, you can see Bitcoin didn't go up as much as it did against a lot of other assets. And this is because during this time, Facebook and Bitcoin were very parabolic. But, you know, coming into, as of late, you know, March 20, like I said, if we pull up that Facebook stock in the past year or so, Facebook has been massively capitulating against the US dollar. I mean, it's capitulated very, very hard since the 7th of September 2021. If we come over to September of 2021 for Bitcoin, you can see Bitcoin was roughly here and we still came up, you know, from 46,000 to 69,000. So that is why we're seeing Bitcoin massively outperform Facebook. Not necessarily from cycle peak to cycle peak, even though it has massively outperformed Facebook, but within the past year, within the past 2 years really, where we've kind of been chopping on the BTC pair to the downside, slash at least back down to the lows. And you can see it's the complete opposite with Facebook. So this is very, very interesting. As always, you can see the peak is up here at 222 units of Facebook stock, and we simply get 228 rather. You simply get that by timesing 228 by the price of Facebook, which is 198, and I imagine that would yield a number within the ballpark vicinity of 29,600, which is the price that Bitcoin is at the time of recording this. So this was a very interesting video to go through. Just to summarize, you can see Bitcoin against the money, the M2 money supply. You can see that when you account for inflation, Bitcoin is not always as parabolic from cycle to cycle as we do believe, but nonetheless, it's still extremely parabolic. Bitcoin against the NASDAQ, another great market performer, but you can see as of late the NASDAQ has been outperforming Bitcoin and we have massively capitulated below the previous all-time high. Coming into Facebook against Tesla, we see something very similar where where Tesla's actually been outperforming Bitcoin since December of 2017. That is also something that's very, very interesting. You know, back in December 2017, you would have been able to accumulate 286 Tesla stock for one Bitcoin, and now you're sitting at roughly around about 39 Tesla stock per Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is still exponentially bullish against Tesla. I mean, it seems fairly obvious. If you kind of cut out this information, it almost looks exactly like the BTC USD chart. But then you come over to this year and you can see that Tesla has been outperforming. Let's check out Bitcoin divided by the SPY. Once again, this is another one where you can see in recent days that the SPY is outperforming Bitcoin because we did not make a new high from the second high, and we've already capitulated back to the previous all-time high in December 2017. Coming over to Bitcoin against gold, you can also see that, you know, Bitcoin is capitulating below the previous all-time high, which is, you know, very interesting as well. But Bitcoin is clearly king from cycle to cycle. Bitcoin is massively outperforming gold. I mean, like I said, you know, during the first peak, Bitcoin was not even worth, you know, if we're talking about this peak in 2011, it wasn't even worth, you know, a gram of gold, let alone, you know, an ounce of gold. But then you come over and you can see it starts pushing up, you know, 1 ounce of gold, 15 ounces of gold, 36 ounces of gold, and currently sitting at 16 ounces of gold. So like I said, don't show Peter shift this chart. If we come over to Bitcoin against silver, once again, this is something where we're kind of capitulating at the previous all-time high at this moment in time, just simply meaning that, you know, quite recently, really within this phase, that silver has been somewhat outperforming Bitcoin. And, you know, if we do check out silver, you can kind of see silver's been holding up relatively well since December of 2020. Coming into BTC against US oil, you once again see this is something very, very similar to BTC versus the US dollar, and BTC versus Facebook, once again very similar to the US dollar. However, Facebook has also been in a massive rally, and that's why we see the data a little bit more flat than normal. So I hope you did enjoy this video where we quantified Bitcoin against different assets. Like I said at the start of this video, everyone does TA on BTC USD. We've seen this chart 1,000,001 different times, but you know, the whole point of being a Bitcoiner, it's in the Bitcoin white paper, is this is meant to be a new form of cash. This is meant to be a new step in the direction of finance for us all. So why would we continue to measure the wealth of our Bitcoin, the price, the value of our Bitcoin against the US dollar, which is a depreciating asset? Surely we'd want to measure Bitcoin against an appreciating asset. Or if we do want to measure Bitcoin against the dollar, we should account for the M2 money supply. So when this does have parabolic runs up, that we know that it's running up because the price against Bitcoin, the price of Bitcoin against other assets is also running up, and it's not just running up because money printer go brr 24/7 and the value of the US dollar is going down. So like I said, this was very interesting. I loved to quantify Bitcoin against different asset classes. If you do want more videos like this where we switch things up, we do things a little bit different, like I said, I like to have my channel go against the grain and look at things a slightly different way than everyone else. I really enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed this video as well. Like I said, if you did want me to show you how to quantify Bitcoin against different asset classes that is not just the US dollar and the pairs that you do find when you simply type in BTC into the TradingView ad symbol, then let me know. As always, hope you found value in this video. Hope you enjoyed it. Cowboy out. Peace.